Welcome, Brett, to the YouTube channel Beyond Co-Sell. Really happy to get you on this channel. And I wanted you to an introduction, who you are, what you've done, what you've built, and obviously touch on PCAN, and then we'll come on to the main focus of this chat today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me on, Mr. Morris. I love it. Love the name of the podcast. I think that's so important for people to recognize that it's not just co-sell. There's so much more that you have to do before you can even get to co-sell, right? So
Yeah.
I'd love to lean in on that a little bit as we go through here. Again, thanks for having me on. So I've been around the Amazonian world for many moons now. I'm at my fourth ISV that I've been working with, and my claims to fame is I've taken three partners, a hat trick of three different ISVs into SRP.
One of the biggest things that I'm very grateful for you is that community, right?
Yep.
You are selfless, and it's quite rare nowadays to get that selflessness where you're spreading the word, but you're spreading your knowledge as well. So partner alliance leads aren't always valued, and there seems to be a lot of changes right now. What we wanted to do today was really understand how you find your next role, specifically as a partner alliance leader. So have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for the juniors out there that are trying to figure it out, you got to start somewhere, right? I always joke that, in order to be a bartender, you can't get hired as a bartender unless you have experience as a bartender. So how do you get started, right? So it can be really challenging there. But I would certainly think about what's going to motivate you on a day to day, because alliances is a lot of moving parts. It is not easy. But when you have that compassion for what you do, what the organization does, and you can get behind the culture, then it makes things a whole lot easier, right? Now you're changing your psyche and the way that you approach it. And I think for some of us that are more experienced, we've had those different areas where we start to kind of find the sweet spot of success. For me, when I look at an organization, it's not only what they do and do they really believe in the product, is the culture behind the product. It's also how big are they? Are they too big? Is it going to take me too long to champion that, to get this, to kind of re-steer the ship? Are they too small to not be ready for the investment that it's going to take to actually, change the way that they're doing business? Because when you go to work with a hypervisor like an Amazon or one of the other monsters out there, you are going to change the way that you do business. You're going to change the way that you transact. You're going to change the way that you build technology. So for me, I've always found this great sweet spot between, let's say, 30 to 150 million, plus or minus 100 to 300 employees. That's a really nice sweet spot. And there's a ton of those emerging SaaS partners that are out there that they're right on the edge of it. They know that it's time to work with the big guys. They also know that they need to be mature enough so that they get in there and they don't see success. They don't see apples in 6 months, that they're not going to cut the program altogether. That's also a common occurrence. So I think even setting those expectations is really important. So yeah, when choosing them, you got to think about all the things that you need to be able to align to. Are you going to have access to executive leadership? Because if you're not, it's going to be hard to get champions. Because champions for us, the 6 C's of the dark arts of AWS, champions exist not only inside of Amazon, they also exist inside your own company. And I've had a lot of success that we can kind of lean into after that. But I'd say, yeah, find the technology that you get excited about. Find the right size organization that you're ready to be effective at, right? Not everybody's going to start as the leader, coming in as a VP or director that's going to completely change the program and the go-to-market motions. You might come in at more co-sell motion and the tactical hand-to-hand combat areas. So as long as you're comfortable with those types of things, lean into it. If they're overly concerned about pure pipeline, that's where I would start to ask questions, very quickly. Do you want channel or do you want alliances? Because there's two very different things.
The job market's pretty tough. What do you see in 2025? What's your advice in going out and finding opportunities? What's your advice for the wider community out there?
So for me, one of my superpowers when I start to chase opportunities is I'll go right back to the first thing I like to do. If I get excited about it, even before I go to interview with the company or to try to find my champion inside the organization or outside the organization to get a referral, because you don't want to just go through LinkedIn. You don't want to just apply on the website. You got to have somebody bring in. You got to have a person, and that person's got to bring you in. But one of the things that I would definitely recommend, and I do this every time I get very serious about an organization, when it seems like a really good fit, or I want to understand more about their technology, I go figure out who their PDM is at AWS, and I go have a conversation with them. Say, hey, here's what I want to do. Here's what I think the changes that could happen. Lean into them. You'd be surprised how much Amazon wants to see you win, because sometimes we start to know the game, right? And that's we just know where the puzzle pieces start to fit. And I've seen this in other organizations where they've got a great product, they're blowing up like crazy, but they're literally just afraid to ask the questions because they don't know what to ask. It's like a deer in headlights. So sometimes just making that extra little step, then you can go, oh, yeah, I know exactly what I can do for you as an organization. Then you're so much more prepared to say, hey, let's change this from, you asking me questions about how we're going to drive pipeline to me asking you questions about, hey, I've got a few ideas and where we can run this as a PLG motion, or here's how you can leverage these different Lego pieces to help accelerate the organization, or where you really haven't touched, you haven't really leaned into engineering dollars and engineering resources, and it's time to get off your own island and let's let the big boys pull us uphill. So I start to think about things like that. I'm certainly seeing like a flood of AWS resumes. We saw it in the COE cut that happened a couple of years ago, and you had somebody with an 8 months worth of resume experience at Amazon on there. And I feel bad that it happened, but it also was a really interesting change to the dynamic of the world of SaaS and just ISVs in general and the SIs and CPs, because they just automatically assume if you work for Amazon, then you know everything about Amazon. But we all know that's not the truth. One thing is understanding programs inside of Amazon. It's very different than executing against those things on the outside of AWS. So I'd be very cognitive of that. And when you're going through the interview process, if you have experience between there, I'd call that out. That's a really, really big motion, because again, I've seen people work for Amazon for years, come out and they have no idea how to put anything into ACE, but they'll tell you how important it is. They just don't know what to do or why to do it. It always goes back to the what to do. Amazon tells you what to do, but not how or why. So that's one thing I would definitely think about when you start going through the interview process. But going back to that, yeah, tons of resumes, higher expectations, and lower pay. Like we've been seeing that trend going down, seeing director levels coming in at 100, 150 grand, which is very different than the last few years. But some of the more mature organizations, you can see that in what they're posting, what their expectations are. They're starting to look at that director role as really more tactical. And then some of the more mature organizations are saying, this is really strategic for us. We need to understand marketplace. How do we leverage all these benefits? How do we change the way that we're doing business as an organization and get out of our own way?
What are you looking for in terms of engagement with that company? Who are you actually engaging with? What's some advice you be looking at when you approach the company? What's a yes and what's a no?
So first things first, right? Like really look at the job description. Again, be weary of pipeline, because it's just not going to give the company the outcome they're looking for, because of the, like we said, the orchard and the apples conversation. Like these are long-term goals. Like you have to co-build first. You got to get into the co-market later, and before you can ever have a seat at the table to co-sell. So, but for me, yeah, I want to know, what does alliances mean to you? That's the first question out of my mouth. And I always say, hey, I categorize my time into three different departments, three different verticals. Got to be working on co-build, and here's some of the benefits that we're going to chase. That could be PPAs, SCAs, competencies, specialties, engineering dollars, sandbox dollars. That's one area, right? And that leads you into finding more champions, and the flywheel starts to continue. And then co-marketing efforts, right? How do we execute against MDF? How can we use POCs to build labs to get more marketing events together to help give funding to customers, to get them excited to get in the room, and of course co-sell and those types of motions. And I kind of like to spell those things out and say, do all these things make sense to you? And is this something that you want to get engaged with as an organization? Because this is what you should expect when you work with somebody like AWS. So I like to set expectations early and then ask those questions, like, what do you want? And if it's the access to engineers to build technology that puts us ahead of the competition by a couple of years, that's the things I like to hear. And so that's what I would say. When you go in, get as high up as you can go. Obviously talk to the hiring managers, see what their expectations are. But a hiring manager is also a generalist. So they're always going to have an idea of what the role is. You really got to get to that next level. Like who is the actual hiring manager, not just HR, right? What's their expectations? And then one of my favorite things to always ask is, let's say if I started tomorrow, what do you want to see as an outcome in 12 months?
Yeah. If you were interviewing someone, what's the biggest red flag that you would go, done? What's that question? What's that red flag?
Easy. What's vision and Verisant? If you don't speak Amazonian, you don't belong, you're not going to be successful and at the level that I need you at. So I like a go-to like that, like a Vision and Verisant, or maybe like a couple obscure programs that, individuals that have leaned into the community and talked about. If you don't have that, you don't have visibility into that, I think you have a way bigger learning curve than you realize. So understanding how like an AWS seller is compensated, like what's an SCB benefit, how does it work? I know everybody's not going to know these things, but that's an instant level of that's how my level of measurement. Like even when I met Michael Musselman 4 or 5 years ago, that was the first thing. I was like, all right, what's Vision and Verisant? He goes, oh yeah, it's the comp problem program for sales quota retirement, and this one's for partner commission. I'm like, oh, you're like a 1%er right there, my friend. Like most people don't know that. And it was like, okay, let's go have a drink. And then it turned into like, all right, let's go have breakfast. And then, kind of relationship developed over that, because it's very few of us that know that. Even inside of AWS, you'd be surprised, like the APO that doesn't talk to the APN, and they also don't understand what Vision and Verison is on the APN versus the APO. And so yeah, I say for me, it's diving into more like, what are these things? What does this actually mean? It may be something as simple as like, how do you transact with CPPO, and how does that work? Give me a high level 50,000 foot view. Because what I'll find is that, again, even though some of these individuals worked at Amazon, they don't actually necessarily know how to execute against that. And that happens in the field too. Like if you're just doing co-sell motions, you may not know how to execute against an FTR. Like those are there's a lot. There's a lot of mechanics when it comes to AWS.
So wrapping up, what's one sentence you would give for experienced pals? Giving your playbook, one sentence for experienced pals and one for emerging pals. Just in process,
interview process. I don't think it matters whether you're day one working with alliances for the first time, or if you're like a Jessica Alexander or Michael Musselman, like some of the goats that have been doing this forever. For me, it's still transparency and engagement every single time, because that's going to help you either get educated really fast. And what I mean by that, it is the fastest way to learn, if you're getting engaged with your sellers, and you're getting engaged with Amazon sellers, and you're learning as you go. Like from day one, that's, I think, the fastest way. Like I can teach you and I can tell you and all that type of stuff, but it's so different when at the hand-to-hand combat level, when you're in there, and especially as a new alliance person, you're learning like what they really care about, and they'll tell you what they care about. Okay, well, how does that drive consumption in EKS, EC2? If you've got an SA on board, or what's it going to do for Redshift, or what's it going to do for here, and there? And it's an easier way to learn, because now you're actually learning what they really care about. They're telling you how they're getting paid. And like, your product sounds great. Whoop-de-doo. How is it going to turn on new services for me? How is it going to drive consumption? How is it going to drive drag? Those types of things. And I also think that even if you're the most mature, it's still really, really great to start there. Transparency and engagement every time, because then you understand where we're actually at in the maturity process. Because if you get in the room and your seller's like ripping off, hey, yeah, I know SCB benefits, we're going to run this thing through Marketplace. Like, oh, okay, well, I'm good here. There's not a ton of enablement engagement that I need to do here. But versus a seller that doesn't know what to do when they're in the room, they're like, well, we can give you 20 points on the deal. I'm like, well, hold on, like it's always the challenge of like, how often do I need to be the liaison, that I'm always being the translator, so that the Amazon, seller is on the same page as my seller, so that we're still getting towards the same outcome. So again, transparency and engagement every time. And I've seen the biggest customers like not understand why they don't get engagement. Like say a very, very large CVE security scanning partner that's out there that only shares a couple hundred opportunities, couple hundred POs a year with Amazon. That could be monstrous because they have 50,000 customers, but they just don't know those types of things, so they never get engaged in it. But if they started to get more transparency and more engagement, you learn, and it picks up pace along the way. It's also what causes like the snowball effect with Amazon. The more opportunities, the more engagement, the more people talk, then the district managers talk, then the regional managers are bringing you into QBRs and Christmas parties. And it all starts from there though, right? It's transparency and engagement.